The last thing I felt was not the sharp crack of my skull against the cold marble, but the heat of betrayal. It was a shove, delicate and precise, disguised as a stumble in the crowded hallway. My cousin Mingju's hand, usually so gentle on my arm, became a weapon. The world tilted. The dizzying perfumes of the chrysanthemum banquet, sandalwood, osmanthus, the cloying sweetness of peony, swam around me. Then, an explosion of white pain as my temple met the unforgiving corner of a pillar carved with phoenixes. How fitting, a detached part of my mind whispered, asterisk to be killed by a phoenix. A creature of rebirth. For me, an end. Asterisk I lay on the cold floor, the vibrant silks of the nobility blurring into a smear of color above me. The din of the banquet faded, replaced by a ringing silence in my ears. And then I heard her, Mingju's voice, dripping with a honeyed grief that made my soul curdle. I am truly, deeply sorry, she wept, the sound perfectly modulated to carry. But my cousin Lien, she was always so stubborn. Her own avarice, her insistence on quarreling over trivial matters, it is what brought this misfortune upon her.
A lie.
It was all a lie. We hadn't been arguing about money. We had been arguing about her. About the discrepancies in the household ledgers I had discovered, the missing funds that led back to her. I had finally found my spine, and she had broken it. Through dimming vision, I saw the crown prince, the man I was once promised to, put a comforting hand on her shoulder. His face, which had once looked upon me with warmth, was a mask of pity for her. Please, do not blame her, Mingju continued, her voice trembling with expertly feigned compassion. She could never see the bigger picture. She was consumed by the small things. Asterisk the small things. Asterisk like the family's honor. Like the truth. Darkness crept at the edges of my sight. The last thing I saw was the triumphant gleam in Mingju's downcast eyes, quickly hidden behind a veil of tears. She had won. She had used my integrity as a weapon against me, my death as her stepping stone. She would have my life, my future, everything. The cold seeped into my bones, and I welcomed the nothingness. I awoke with a gasp that tore at my throat, my hands flying to my head. No searing pain. No cold marble. Just the soft embrace of my own goose-down mattress. Sunlight, gentle and golden, streamed through the latticed window of my bedchamber. The air smelled of sandalwood and the faint, clean scent of the lotus blossoms floating in the courtyard pond. I was in my room in the Shin family estate in Lingzhou. Not in the capital. Not dead. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. I touched my temple. Smooth, unbroken skin. A dream? I whispered, my voice hoarse. But it wasn't. The memory was too vivid, the phantom pain too real, the taste of betrayal still metallic on my tongue. The rustle of silk curtains announced the entrance of my maid, Inue. Young mistress? You're awake. You cried out in your sleep. Her familiar, concerned face was a balm and a torment. I had watched her weep over my body in that other life. Before I could answer, the voice I had heard last in a lie sliced through the morning calm. Dearest Lien, are you still abed? The household affairs wait for no one. The door slid open without ceremony, and there she stood.
Su Mingsu.
Dressed in a gown of pale pink silk that made her look like a freshly bloomed peach blossom, innocent and sweet. In her hand, she held a ledger. The very same one. The sight of it sent a jolt of pure, undiluted rage through me. It was all I could do not to leap from the bed and strangle her with my bare hands. She fluttered into the room, a picture of harmless energy. Oh, you look pale, cousin. Did you not sleep well? She didn't wait for an answer, thrusting the ledger toward me. You must help me. The count for the Mid-Autumn Festival mooncakes seems off. The silver allocated is enough for 500, but the steward insists we only received 300. It's a significant difference. You're so much better with these tedious numbers than I am. Could you speak to Steward Gua for me? Her tone was dripping with that familiar, cloying dependency. It was a song I had danced to 1,000 times. She would play the helpless, fluttery beauty, and I would become the sharp-tongued, demanding shrew who confronted the powerful, ill-tempered Steward Gua. She would reap the benefits of the recovered funds, and I would bear the brunt of the steward's resentment and the family's gossip about my petty and aggressive nature. In my past life, I had taken the ledger. I had marched into Steward Gua's office and demanded an accounting, making a powerful enemy. And when I returned, victorious with the missing silver. Mingzhu had sighed and said, "Was it really worth upsetting the poor man so? He has a family to feed." The memory was a brand, fresh and searing. I did not reach out to take the ledger. My hands remained clenched in my lap, hidden by the silk sheets. I could feel Inghua holding her breath behind me. Mingzhu's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Lien." I forced my own lips to curve into a faint, weary smile. "Cousin," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "This month, it is your honored mother's turn to manage the household finances. It is an excellent opportunity for you to learn. Don't you think? You should figure it out." The silence that followed was profound. I saw the flicker in her eyes. First confusion, then a spark of panic, quickly smothered. Her hand, still holding the ledger, hung awkwardly in the air. "My mother is unwell this morning," she stammered, the lie clumsy. "And you know how Steward Gua is, his temper?" "Indeed," I agreed calmly, my gaze unwavering. "Which is why it is so important for the daughter of the managing mistress to confront him. It will show him that your branch of the family cannot be trifled with. It would be a show of strength." I subtly shifted, pulling the hem of my sleeve back, a small gesture that made Inghua and my other maid take a half step closer to me, aligning themselves with my space. The shift in the room's energy was subtle, but undeniable. Mingzhu was isolated, her script torn to shreds. She was accustomed to my immediate compliance, to using me as her shield and her sword. Without it, she was exposed. Her cheeks flushed a faint, angry pink. She glanced toward the door, where a few lower-ranking servants were waiting for instructions, their faces curious. The pressure was on her, and for the first time, she had nowhere to hide. But Lien," she whispered, her voice losing its sweet melody, becoming strained. "It's only a few taels of silver." "Precisely," I said, my voice soft but carrying. I leaned forward slightly, as if sharing a secret. "And if it's such a trivial matter, cousin, then surely it is not worth creating a scene over. Perhaps it is better to just let it go this time. As you always say, one must be magnanimous." I had used her own favorite word against her. The trap snapped shut. If she insisted, she was petty and scene-making. If she let it go, she was weak and lost the silver. The flawless mask of the perfect cousin finally cracked. For a single, unguarded moment, I saw the raw fury in her eyes, a viper poised to strike. Then it was gone, replaced by a wounded expression. "Very well," she said, her voice tight. She snatched the ledger back to her chest. "I see you are in no mood to be helpful today." She turned and swept out of the room, her retreat as graceful as a retreating army, but a retreat nonetheless. The moment the door slid shut, my shoulders slumped. The strength I had summoned drained from me, leaving me trembling. Inghua rushed forward. "Young mistress, are you all right? You were different." I looked at her, truly looked at her. The loyal maid who had stayed by my side until the bitter end. A wave of dizzying, terrifying certainty washed over me. It was not a dream. I had lived. I had died. And I had been sent back. I was Shun Lian, but I was also the ghost of the woman who died on a cold marble floor, betrayed. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of sandalwood and lotus now smelling not of home, but of a battlefield. "Inghua," I said, my voice a low whisper. "From now on, everything is different." That night, through the thin paper wall of the partition, I heard Mingzhu's hushed, furious voice from her adjoining chamber, complaining to her mother. "She humiliated me. What a ripoff. Those missing tails are my new silk slippers. It's all her fault. If she'd just done her duty and gotten my money back, I wouldn't be lying here wide awake in the middle of the night." A faint, cold smile finally touched my lips, the first true expression I had allowed myself all day. "Sleep well, cousin," I thought, staring into the darkness. Your days of blissful manipulation are over. This is just the beginning. The morning after my refusal, the air in the Shun estate was thick with unspoken tension. It tasted different now, not just of dust and incense, but of shifted allegiances and silent calculations. I had thrown a single pebble into the still pond of our family's life, and now I had to navigate the ripples. I took my breakfast of congee and pickled vegetables in my chamber, the simple act feeling like a declaration of war. In my past life, I would have already been in the main hall, sharing a meal with Mingzhu and her mother, Auntie Sue, my presence a given, my role defined. Today, I was absent. Let them wonder. Let them whisper. Ingyue moved with a new, quiet purposefulness as she dressed me. The young mistress Mingzhu did not speak to Steward Gua, she murmured, her fingers deftly tying the sash of my pale jade-green gown. She told her mother she had a headache and retired early. The missing silver remains missing. I nodded, a grim satisfaction settling in my stomach. Mingzhu had chosen to swallow the loss rather than face the battle herself. It was the first crack in her facade of capable virtue. A small one, but foundations were eroded by such small, consistent drips. Ingyue, I said, turning to her. I need you to be my eyes and ears. Not just for the loud arguments, but for the quiet words spoken in the kitchens, the laundry courtyard, the gardens. Her eyes widened, but she nodded without hesitation. Of course, young mistress. There is a maid who works in the gardens, I continued, recalling a face from my fractured memories. Thin, quiet girl. Always has a keen, observant look about her. Her name is Xiaoyu. I know of her, Ingyue said. She is an orphan, taken in by the head gardener. She is sharp, but keeps to herself. Find a reason to speak with her. Be kind. See if her loyalty can be cultivated. I chose the word carefully. In this house, loyalty was a currency more valuable than silver. My first public appearance of the day was in the main family hall for morning tea with the grand matriarch, my father's mother. She sat enthroned in her carved rosewood chair, a formidable woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing despite her advanced years. Mingzhu and Auntie Sue were already there, pouring tea and filling the air with light, tinkling laughter that felt as fragile as glass. Lien, you look pale, Auntie Sue said the moment I entered, her voice syrupy with false concern. Mingzhu told us you were unwell yesterday. We were so worried. So, that was the story she'd spun. I offered a slight, graceful bow to the grand matriarch before taking my seat. Thank you for your concern, Auntie. It was a passing fatigue. I am quite recovered. I let my gaze drift to Mingzhu, who was studiously avoiding my eyes. I hope your headache has improved, cousin. It is a heavy burden, managing household finances. The stress can be quite overwhelming for the uninitiated. Mingzhu's smile was brittle. It was nothing. I simply decided that harmony within the household is more important than a few missing tails. One must be magnanimous, as you said. She was trying to reclaim the narrative, to paint her retreat as a conscious choice of virtue. I allowed a look of mild admiration to cross my face. How wise of you, cousin. It is a noble sentiment. I paused, taking a delicate sip of tea. Although, if such discrepancies become a habit, it could reflect poorly on your mother's management. But I am sure it was a one-time error.
Auntie Sue's smile tightened.
I had subtly shifted the blame from Mingzhu's incompetence to her mother's potential negligence. The grand matriarch made a non-committal hum into her teacup, but her eyes flickered between us. The opportunity one had been waiting for came later that afternoon. A few visiting young ladies from other prominent Lingzhou families had come to view Auntie Sue's famed collection of peonies. It was a casual, social affair, but in our world, every social affair was a stage. Mingzhu was in her element, flitting among the blossoms, comparing them to the complex embroidery on her own gown. Oh, this one is the color of the dawn sky. It reminds me of the new bolt of silk of clouds I just acquired. It was so dreadfully expensive, but one must have beautiful things, don't you agree? The other girls murmured their assent, their envy a palpable force. Seeing my chance, I approached the group. Cousin, I said, my voice light and friendly. Your taste is impeccable as always. That silk will make a stunning gown for the upcoming moon viewing poetry contest. Mingzhu preened. I thought so too. I let a shadow of concern cross my face. It is a pity, though. I trailed off, drawing every eye to me. What is a pity? One of the other girls asked. I sighed softly. It is a pity that the last time you borrowed a piece of fine jewelry to complement such a splendid fabric, the jade hairpin with the kingfisher feathers, a gift from the governor's wife, if I recall, it was returned to the vault with a crack in the stone. I turned my concerned gaze fully on Mingzhu. You were so distraught. You said it must have happened when you stumbled in the garden. I do hope you are more careful with this new silk. Fine things require a gentle hand. The silence was deafening. Mingzhu's face drained of color. The kingfisher hairpin incident had been hushed up, the broken piece quietly replaced from the family coffers at my father's expense. I had been the one to console her then, believing her story of a tragic accident. Now, I had publicly reminded everyone of her carelessness with valuable objects. It was an accident. Mingzhu stammered, her composure shattered. Of course it was. I agreed smoothly, my tone gentle, understanding. We are all prone to mishaps. I merely mention it out of sisterly concern. I would hate for your beautiful new silk to meet a similar fate. I reached out and patted her arm, the picture of a caring cousin. Perhaps something sturdier, like grandmother's phoenix pin, would be a safer choice? It is so much more durable. The message was received by all. Mingzhu was careless with precious things. Her grace was a performance that faltered under pressure. I excused myself shortly after, leaving a flustered Mingzhu to the poorly concealed whispers of her peers. As I walked back toward my wing of the estate, the weight of their stares felt like a victory. Later, in the solitude of my room, Inue returned, her eyes bright with news. Young mistress, I spoke with Xiaoyu as you asked, and… She was hesitant at first, Inue reported. But when I gave her the pastries you sent, and spoke of your interest in the well-being of the lower servants, she opened up. She said, Inue lowered her voice. She said that the day the kingfisher hairpin was broken, she was trimming the bonsai near the moon gate. She saw young mistress Mingzhu not stumbling, but throwing the hairpin to the ground in a fit of rage after receiving a letter. Then she picked it up, saw it was cracked, and pretended to fall. My blood ran cold, even though I had suspected as much. The calculated deceit of it took my breath away. Mingzhu hadn't just been careless, she had been destructive and then manipulative. Did she see the letter? I asked, my voice tight.
Xiaoyu did not, Inue said.
But she said it was delivered by a private courier, not the house messenger. A private courier. Intrigue upon intrigue. This was more than just petty theft and broken trinkets. Mingzhu had secrets that reached beyond these walls. Thank you, Inue, I said, my mind racing. Ensure Xiaoyu knows her discretion is valued, and that her loyalty will be rewarded. As night fell, the first thread of Mingzhu's perfect tapestry had been pulled. The image of the virtuous, graceful cousin now had a visible flaw. She was careless. She was clumsy with the truth. And I had a new, quiet ally in the shadows. I looked out at the moon, a slender crescent like a sharpened nail paring hanging in the indigo sky. The game was afoot, and this time I knew the rules. A week passed, each day a delicate dance on a knife's edge. The ripple from the peony garden incident had spread. I saw it in the way the serving girls now hesitated slightly before following Mingzhu's orders, and in the more assessing glances the grand matriarch gave her during morning tea. Mingzhu, for her part, had adopted a wounded, saintly air, speaking softly of forgiveness and the burdens of being misunderstood. It was a masterful performance, but the audience was no longer entirely convinced. The catalyst for the next confrontation arrived with the summer rains. News swept through the estate. Imperial Inspector Bai, a high-ranking official from the capital known for his austere integrity and his direct line to the emperor, was making a tour of the southern provinces and would be gracing Lingzhou with a visit. For the Shun family, this was not just an honor, it was a pivotal moment. A good impression could mean increased favor, lucrative trade permissions, or even a recommendation for a court position for one of the younger men. A misstep could mean ruin. The air crackled with a new, more potent tension. My father and his advisors became shadows flitting between meetings, while the women's quarters buzzed with preparations for the welcoming banquet. It was in this hothouse atmosphere that Mingzhu saw her chance to reclaim her tarnished glory. She found me in the library, ostensibly searching for a volume of poetry. Cousin Lian, she began, her voice a confiding whisper. This visit from Inspector Bai. It is so important for our family. We must present a gift that reflects our status and our refinement. I looked up from the scroll I was feigning to read. I am sure father and the Grand Steward have the matter well in hand. Oh, but something from the men feels so predictable. She leaned in, her eyes wide with feigned inspiration. I was thinking of something more personal from the women of the household. Something that speaks of Lingzhou's finest craft. A bolt of the legendary cloud-weave silk. I stilled. Cloud-weave silk. It was a fabric so fine it was said to be woven from clouds and moonlight, with a price that could feed a small village for a year. It was an extravagance, even for us. That is a bold suggestion, cousin, I said carefully. The cost is nothing compared to the honor of our family, she declared a little too fervently. I have already taken the liberty of sending a message to the master weaver. He has one last bolt. A deep azure shot through with silver threads, like a midnight sky. It is perfect. A gift worthy of an imperial inspector. My blood ran cold. She had already committed the family to this purchase without authorization. In my past life, this was exactly the kind of impulsive, grand gesture she would have convinced me to champion, leaving me to face the fury of the accounts department while she basked in the potential glory. I see, I said, my voice neutral. And you have secured the funds from the steward? A flicker of unease crossed her face. The household funds are temporarily tied up with the banquet preparations. But once the inspector is impressed, no one will question the expense. It is an investment. It was a gamble. A reckless, arrogant gamble. And she was playing it with the family's treasury. I admire your initiative, I lied, dipping my brush in ink to hide the trembling in my hand. It is a daring plan. I am sure it will be memorable. My apparent acquiescence seemed to satisfy her. She floated out of the library, already dreaming of accolades. The moment she was gone, I dropped the pretense. Inoué, I hissed. She emerged from the shadows near the doorway. Young mistress? The cloud weave silk. Mingzhu has ordered it. Find Xiao Yu. I need to know two things. First, the exact content of the message she sent to the master weaver. Second, I need to know when the bill is delivered and to whom. Ingyuan nodded and vanished. The next 2 days were a study in controlled panic. The bill, a staggering sum that made even my father blanch when he heard of it secondhand, arrived not with the regular household accounts, but was delivered directly to Auntie Sue's quarters. This was her tactic, to keep the transaction within her branch of the family, to control the narrative. I waited. I did not go to my father. I did not go to the Grand Matriarch. I knew that a direct accusation would only look like petty jealousy. Instead, I planted a seed. During a casual walk with the Grand Matriarch in her private garden, I admired her peonies and steered the conversation. The estate is buzzing with preparations for the inspector's visit, I remarked. It is such an important occasion. I overheard Cousin Mingzhu speaking of a gift that would truly stun him. She has such grand ideas. I confess, I worry sometimes that her enthusiasm outpaces her prudence. The Grand Matriarch snipped a dead bloom with a small pair of silver shears. Oh, what sort of grand idea? I believe she mentioned something about cloud-weave silk, I said, as if it were a mere trifle. She seems convinced it is the only worthy gift. The old woman's hand stilled. Her eyes, sharp as daggers, met mine. Cloud-weave? Who authorized such an expense? I do not know, grandmother, I said innocently. I assumed it was with your blessing, or Auntie Sue's. She said nothing more, but the seed was planted. The suspicion was now rooted in the most powerful mind in the household. The storm broke the following morning. The master weaver, a proud and impatient man, had arrived at the gates demanding payment. The bill had been presented to Auntie Sue, who, in a state of panic, had tried to defer it, blaming household accounting delays. The weaver, insulted, threatened to take the silk back and publicly decry the Shun family's dishonor. The news reached the Grand Steward, Gua, a man whose loyalty was to the ledger above all else. Furious at this end run around his authority, he descended upon the main hall where Auntie Sue and Mingzhu were attempting to placate the weaver. I arrived just as the scene was reaching its peak, lingering in the doorway, an unobserved spectator. This is an unauthorized expenditure. Steward Gua boomed, his face purple with rage. The household funds cannot be ravaged for a lady's whim. It is not a whim, Mingzhu cried, her voice shrill. It is for the family's honor. Honor? The steward scoffed. There is no honor in debt. This sum represents a quarter of the quarterly charitable donations. Should we let the orphans in the Silent Lotus Sanctuary go hungry for your silk? It was a masterful blow. He had framed her extravagance not just as financial folly, but as a moral failure. It was then that I made my move. I stepped forward, my expression one of calm concern. Steward Gua, Master Weaver, please, let us not have a scene. I turned to the weaver and offered a deep, respectful bow. Master Weaver, please accept the profound apologies of the Shin family. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. The young mistress in question acted with a generous heart, but without the proper authority. The fault is ours. My deference disarmed him. He grunted, slightly mollified. I then looked at Mingzhu, my gaze not accusing but pitying. Cousin, I said softly, loud enough for all to hear. Your desire to bring honor to our family is commendable, but such a grand gesture. It must be backed by one's own means, not the family's treasury. Surely you understand. I had trapped her perfectly. She could either admit she had no means of her own, revealing her financial dependence, or she could claim she did, which was a lie. Auntie Sue, seeing the disaster unfolding, stepped in, her voice trembling. We will cover the cost. For my daughter's dowry. The words fell like a death sentence. Mingju's face went as white as the raw silk. Her dowry, her future security, gutted for a bolt of cloth. The grand matriarch's voice cut through the room from the entrance. We had an audience. See that you do, she said, her tone icy. She did not look at Mingju or Auntie Sue. Her gaze rested on me for a long moment, a complex mix of appraisal and something that might have been respect. A lesson in prudence is sometimes more valuable than a gift of silk. See, the master weaver is paid in full.
Today. She turned and left.
The show was over. Later, as a sullen silence fell over the estate, Ingwe came to me with the final piece of the puzzle. Xiao Yu confirmed it, young mistress. The message Mingju sent to the weaver. She signed it. With your name. I closed my eyes. So that was her final ploy. If the gift had been a success, she would have claimed credit. When it failed, the blame would have fallen on Shun Lian, the petty girl trying to buy influence with stolen funds. But I had been a step ahead. I had not championed the silk. I had only expressed vague, feigned support in private. My public actions were all of a conciliatory, responsible family member. I looked at the rain washing the courtyard stones clean. Mingju had not just lost a fortune from her dowry. She had been exposed before the grand matriarch and the steward as reckless, deceitful, and financially irresponsible. The viper had struck, and this time, she had poisoned herself. The silk, that beautiful, poisonous gift, was now locked away in a vault, a stark reminder of her folly. And I had not even needed to raise my voice. The fallout from the Cloudweave silk incident was a quiet, seething thing. The estate didn't explode with shouts. Instead, it froze over with a polite, brittle silence. Mingju and Auntie Sue became ghosts at the feast, present at meals and gatherings but shrouded in a palpable aura of disgrace. The grand matriarch's favor, that most precious and fickle of commodities, had visibly cooled toward them. I felt no triumph, only a cold, hard clarity. I had successfully defended against Mingju's attack and turned it back on her, but a defense alone would not win this war. To secure my future, to truly dismantle hers, I needed to build something she could not tear down. I needed a reputation that was not just about not being petty, but about being genuinely virtuous, wise, and connected to the world beyond our gilded walls. The key, I remembered from my past life, was the Silent Lotus Sanctuary. It was a humble place, a small nunnery on the outskirts of Lingzhou, nestled beside a murky lotus pond. It housed a handful of elderly nuns and a ramshackle orphanage they struggled to maintain. In my first life, I had considered it beneath my notice, a place for the truly devout or the desperately charitable. Mingju had occasionally visited with a great show of fanfare, distributing sweets and old clothes for a day, ensuring the town gossip spoke of her boundless compassion. It was a performance, and like all her performances, it was shallow. But I remembered something else. In the depths of the cold winter that followed my death in my past life, a sickness had swept through the city. The Silent Lotus Sanctuary, with its connections to obscure herbalists and its nuns' knowledge of folk remedies, had been one of the few places that could effectively treat the poor. Their reputation had soared too late to benefit me then, but the memory was a beacon now. My blue, undyed cotton robe, Ingwe, I instructed one morning. And the plainest palanquin. We're going out. Ingwe looked surprised, but did not question me. Dressing in simple, unadorned cloth felt like shedding a skin. It was liberating. The journey to the Silent Lotus Sanctuary was a descent from one world to another. The bustling, prosperous streets of central Lingzhou gave way to narrower, dirtier lanes, the air shifting from incense and perfume to the smells of damp earth, unwashed bodies, and wood smoke. The sanctuary itself was a study in weathered grace. The paint on the wooden gate was peeling, and the lotus pond was choked with weeds, but the stone path was swept clean, and a sense of profound peace hung in the air. An old nun, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes clear and sharp as polished jet, met us at the gate. She introduced herself as Jean Fei. "Honored lady," she said, her bow deep and respectful, but lacking any fawning servitude. To what do we owe this visit? I am Shunlian, I said, returning her bow with equal respect. I have come to offer my help, if you will have it. Not with silver today, but with my hands. Her eyes assessed me, seeing past the simple robe to the noble bearing I could not fully disguise. There was no judgment in her gaze, only a deep, weary curiosity. I spent that first morning in the orphanage's cramped infirmary. The children were suffering from summer fevers and stomach ailments, their small bodies racked with coughs. The overworked nuns were doing their best with poultices and prayers. I have some knowledge of herbs, I said to Jean Fei, kneeling beside a small boy burning with fever. In my past life, confined to my bed during long illnesses, I had consumed every scroll on medicine and botany I could find. It had been a solitary pursuit then. Now it was a weapon. I showed them how to identify Ban Lan Zhen for sore throats and to prepare a more effective infusion of honeysuckle for fever. I showed a young novice how to create a mint and ginger paste for unsettled stomachs. It was simple, practical knowledge, but it was knowledge they lacked. I did not command. I did not perform. I simply worked, my sleeves rolled up, grinding herbs in a stone mortar, helping to spoon broth into listless mouths. The children, initially wary of this fine lady, slowly warmed to my quiet presence. As the days turned into a week, and then two, my visits became a routine. I never arrived with an entourage. I came only with Yue, and sometimes with a basket of simple, nourishing food from our kitchens, not lavish delicacies, but sturdy buns and salted eggs. I listened to Jean Fei speak of the cycles of the seasons and the philosophy of detachment. I learned the names of the orphans. I held a little girl named Xia while she cried for a mother she would never know. This was not a performance. This was an anchor. In the quiet, struggling sanctuary, away from the suffocating politics of the Shen estate, I could breathe. I could remember what it felt like to be useful for a reason other than advancing a position. Yet, I was not so naive as to believe that virtue in a vacuum had any power. Reputation was a currency, and it needed to be minted and circulated. I did not speak of my visits at home, but I knew the world was not so sealed. The nuns went into the market to sell their simple woven goods. The herbalist I had consulted for more potent ingredients was a known gossip. Yue, under my direction, would occasionally mention my absences with a respectful sigh. The young mistress is at the Silent Lotus Sanctuary again. Her heart is so tender, she cannot bear to see the children suffer. The whispers began, as I knew they would. But they were different from the whispers that surrounded Mingzhu. They were not about extravagance or carelessness. They were quiet, respectful murmurs. Asterisk, the Shen daughter, Lian. She is often at the old sanctuary. They say she grinds the herbs herself. Asterisk, asterisk, she doesn't just throw silver at the problem. She stays for hours. It is a true devotion. Asterisk, asterisk, the head nun, Jean Fei, a woman of few praises, says the Shen girl has a healer's hands and a quiet heart. Asterisk, one afternoon, as I was leaving the sanctuary, a plainly dressed but clearly well-born woman in a modest palanquin was arriving. Our eyes met for a brief moment. She was older, her expression stern and intelligent. I offered a slight, polite nod and continued on my way. It was only later, through Yue's discreet inquiries, that I discovered the woman's identity. She was the wife of the prefect of Lingzhou, a woman known for her piety and her disdain for empty show. She was a close friend of Jean Fei and a frequent, anonymous benefactor of the sanctuary. My path, it seemed, was crossing with the right people. Returning to the estate that evening, the air felt different. The intricate carvings, the lavish silks, the subtle scent of intrigue, it was all the same, but I was not. I had built a small, solid fortress of my own outside these walls. A reputation built on quiet, consistent action, not on grand, fleeting gestures. Mingzhu still had her silks and her poetry, but I was building something that could not be cracked, broken, or bought. I was building a foundation of stone, while hers was built on sand. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that when the storm came, and it would come, only one of us would remain standing. The poetry contest was approaching, and with it, the first real test of which foundation was stronger. The moon-viewing poetry contest was the social event of the Lingzhou season. Held in the prefect's own gardens, it was a glittering assembly of the province's most talented and ambitious young nobility. For us, the unmarried daughters of great houses, it was a battlefield draped in silk, where reputations were won and lost on the turn of a verse or the pluck of a string. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a quiet, desperate energy, perfumed by night-blooming jasmine and ambition. I stood with a small group of young ladies near a pond shimmering with reflected lantern light, my own heart a steady, determined drum. I was dressed in a gown of muted silver gray, embroidered with barely visible cranes in flight, a statement of elegance without ostentation. Across the terrace, Mingju was a vision in peony pink, her gown a riot of embroidered flowers, a living extension of her vibrant, carefully constructed persona. She held her prized lute, longing for the moon, as if it were a part of her. She had been practicing a complex, showy piece for weeks, her confidence a visible, radiant thing. In my past life, this had been her triumph. I had performed a simple, technically perfect, but emotionally sterile zither piece. She had stolen the evening, her performance hailed as passionate and inspired. Later, I discovered the reason for her newfound passion, a handsome, rising young official in the audience whom she was desperate to impress. Her ambition had lent her fingers a borrowed fire. This time, I was not here to be her dull foil. The prefect's wife, the stern woman I had glimpsed at the Silent Lotus Sanctuary, opened the contest. She spoke of the harmony between man, nature, and art, her gaze sweeping over us, missing nothing. My performance was to come before Mingju's. As my name was called, I felt 100 eyes upon me. I saw Mingju's smug, pitying smile. She expected my usual competent, but forgettable display. I carried my zither, whispering water, to the center of the terrace and knelt. Instead of launching into my prepared piece, I let my fingers rest on the strings for a long, silent moment, my gaze drifting to the full, brilliant moon hanging like a luminous pearl in the velvet sky. Then I began to play. But it was not the piece I had practiced. It was a different melody, one I had learned from an old, half-blind musician who sometimes played for the nuns. It was a folk tune, simple in its structure, a song about a traveler far from home, gazing at the same moon and thinking of his family. There were no dazzling fingerwork acrobatics, no complex, showy techniques. The beauty was in its aching simplicity, in the spaces between the notes, in the longing it evoked. I poured into it the loneliness of my first life, the quiet desperation of the orphans at the sanctuary, the profound peace I found in Jean Fei's wisdom. I played not for the audience, but for the moon itself. The chattering quieted, the rustle of silk stilled. As the last note faded, hanging in the air like a dewdrop about to fall, the silence was profound, then broken by a soft, sincere sigh from the crowd. I rose and bowed. The applause was not thunderous, but it was deep, thoughtful. I saw the prefect's wife give a slow, deliberate nod. I saw Scholar Official Lee, who had arrived discreetly, watching me with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. I had not beaten them with technical skill. I had disarmed them with truth. Then it was Mingju's turn. She floated to the center, the picture of consummate grace. She bowed, her smile dazzling. But I saw the tightness around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. My performance had unnerved her. It had changed the energy of the evening, making her planned flamboyance seem cheap. She began to play. Her piece was, as expected, technically brilliant and fiercely dramatic. Her fingers flew across the strings, producing a cascade of notes. But the passion felt forced, the emotion a gaudy costume. She was playing to win, not to feel. And then it happened. A high, sharp note, a moment of intended climax, was suddenly severed by a sickening twang. The sound was so discordant, so violently out of place, it was like a physical blow. The string, the highest and thinnest on her lute, had snapped. It recoiled, whipping against the instrument's polished wood and against Mingju's cheek, leaving a thin, red line. The music died an abrupt, ugly death. Mingju froze, her hands hovering over the instrument, her face a perfect canvas of shock, humiliation, and dawning horror. The silence that followed was 1,000 times heavier and more judgmental than the one that had followed my piece. It was filled with gasps, muffled exclamations, and the unbearable weight of public failure. Her flawless performance had shattered, literally, at its peak. In my past life, this had been my fate. A mishap with my zither, a string that snapped because Mingju had secretly nicked it with a hairpin earlier in the day. She had then been the one to console me, the picture of sympathetic grace. I had never suspected. This time, I had been waiting. This morning, under the pretense of wishing her luck, I had visited her chambers. While she preened before her mirror, my fingers, quick and sure, had found the fine, almost invisible file hidden in her jewelry box. And I had used it. A few delicate strokes against her own highest string. Not enough to break it then, just enough to weaken it, to ensure it would fail under the strain of her most aggressive passage. She had tried to sabotage me, but I had turned her own weapon back on her. For a long moment no one moved. Mingju looked like a beautiful porcelain doll that had been dropped, a crack marring its perfect surface. Then I moved. I walked calmly to the center of the terrace, the focus of every gaze. I did not look at Mingju with pity or triumph. My expression was one of serene practicality. I stopped before her, my own zither still in my maid's hands. "Cousin," I said, my voice clear and carrying, yet gentle. "Do not be distressed. It is but a string. The fault lies with the instrument, not the musician." I turned slightly to address the audience. "The humidity tonight is unusual. It can play havoc with the finest gut strings." I was giving her an excuse, a way to save face, and in doing so, I appeared magnanimous beyond measure. I then turned back to her and did the unthinkable. I held out my own zither, whispering water. "Here," I said. "Please use mine. Do not let a mere mishap silence your music." The gesture was so stunning, so utterly selfless, that a collective, soft gasp went through the crowd. To offer one's own, perfectly tuned instrument to a rival, in the middle of a contest. Mingju stared at my zither as if it were a venomous snake. To accept would be to acknowledge my overwhelming generosity, to become indebted to me in front of everyone. To refuse would make her look churlish and ungrateful. She was trapped in a cage of my making, lined with velvet. I couldn't," she stammered, her voice a broken whisper. "The music is what matters, cousin," I insisted softly, pressing the zither toward her. "Not the vessel." She had no choice. With trembling hands, she took my zither, but the moment was ruined. Her composure was shattered. She attempted to play, but the fire was gone, the magic broken. The notes were technically correct but hollow, the performance a ghost of what it should have been. She finished to polite, perfunctory applause that sounded more like pity. The rest of the evening was a blur. The winner was announced, a young man from a scholarly family whose poem about the ephemeral nature of beauty had moved the judges. But the true victor, in the unspoken contest of character, was clear. As people departed, I heard the whispers, just as I knew I would. Xin Lian, her music was so heartfelt. And her grace. To offer her own zither after such a performance. A true lady. The other, well, fortune did not favor her tonight. Mingju left without a word to anyone, her face a mask of fury and shame. I watched her go, the silver gray of my gown blending with the moonlight. I had not just beaten her. I had orchestrated her humiliation in a way that elevated me. I had taken her planned sabotage and transformed it into a showcase of my own character. The broken lute string would be the story they told, and in it, I was the heroine, and she was the cautionary tale. The viper had struck at the moon, and the moon had answered with a light that revealed her for the earthbound creature she was. The morning after the poetry contest, the Shun estate was abuzz with a different kind of energy. The gossip about Mingju's snap string and my magnanimous gesture had already seeped into every corridor, but it was overshadowed by a far more significant development. A messenger from the prefect's office had arrived at dawn. Scholar officially, the Crown Prince's esteemed envoy had been so impressed by the refined character displayed at the gathering that he wished to conduct a more intimate assessment of the young ladies of the Shin family. This was not a social call. It was an examination. The news struck the household like a thunderclap. Auntie Sue immediately sequestered Mingju, the sounds of frantic coaching and the rustle of silk echoing from their wing. I retreated to the quiet of my garden, the words, refined character, echoing in my mind. He had not said accomplished or beautiful. He had seen through the performance, both mine and Mingju's, and was looking for something deeper. The assessment was held in the estate's most elegant reception hall, reserved for only the most distinguished guests. Scholar Official Lee sat poised on a raised dais, his demeanor not unkind, but exuding an intellectual austerity that demanded truth. He was a man in his late 40s, with a quiet intensity in his eyes that seemed to measure the soul. My father and the Grand Matriarch sat to the side, silent and watchful. Mingju and I knelt on silk cushions before him, the air between us crackling with unspoken rivalry. The arts of poetry, music, and calligraphy are the pillars of a cultivated mind, Scholar officially began, his voice calm and precise. But they are merely tools. It is the wisdom with which one wields them that reveals the quality of the spirit. We shall begin with poetry. My heart, which had been a steady drum, gave a single, hard thump. This was it. You have one incense stick to compose a poem, he instructed. The theme is the willow in autumn. A servant lit a slender stick of sandalwood incense. The faint, sweet smoke began to curl into the air. Mingju seized her brush immediately, her brow furrowed in concentration. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, searching her memory for a suitable classical allusion, a clever turn of phrase. She was building a palace of words, ornate and impressive. I closed my eyes. I did not think of famous poems or complex structures. I thought of the actual willows by the muddy pond at the Silent Lotus Sanctuary, their long, graceful branches now tinged with gold, shedding leaves like silent tears onto the dark water. I thought of their enduring nature, their resilience, their quiet acceptance of seasonal decay as part of life's cycle. When the incense was half gone, I picked up my brush. My strokes were fluid and sure. Gilded tears fall, a silent, gentle rain. Bare branches trace the sky's enduring pain. Not a lament for stolen summer's glee, but a promise to the wind of what will be. Asterisk, it was simple, unadorned. It spoke not of the willow's beauty, but of its strength and its quiet faith in renewal. Mingju finished just as the ash fell from the incense stick. Her poem was technically flawless, filled with elegant metaphors comparing the willow to a dancer and the falling leaves to discarded silks. It was beautiful and utterly soulless. Scholar officially read both poems, his face an unreadable mask. He made no comment, merely setting them aside. The second test, he announced, is calligraphy. You will write the character for truth. Asterisk Chung.
Star.
A character comprising the radicals for word and completion.
To speak and to accomplish.
To make one's word whole. Mingju approached the low table with a flourish. She ground the ink with practiced, graceful motions, her every movement a performance. She selected a fine brush, loaded it with a dramatic amount of ink, and began. Her character was bold, powerful, the strokes sharp and commanding. It was a truth that demanded to be seen, that sought to dominate the page. It was magnificent, and as I looked at it, I thought of her lies, her manipulations. The disconnect was jarring. My turn. I washed my brush clean. I ground the ink slowly, focusing on the smooth, circular motion, letting my mind still. I did not choose a large brush. I selected a smaller, finer one. I did not seek to fill the page. I sought to fill the character with meaning. I thought of the truth of the orphan's hunger, the truth of Jean Fei's weary eyes, the truth of my own second chance. I poured that into my brush. My strokes were not bold, but they were deep and unwavering. The lines were clean, balanced, harmonious. The character did not shout. It simply was. It was a truth that was integrated, complete in itself, needing no external validation. Scholar officially leaned forward slightly as he examined my work, a faint, almost imperceptible nod the only sign of his reaction. The final test, he said, his gaze shifting between us, is not of art, but of mind. Imagine you are overseeing the distribution of emergency grain after a flood. You have a limited supply. The local magistrate, a powerful man, demands a larger share for his district, arguing they have more influential citizens. The common refugees are desperate and numerous. How do you ensure fairness? It was a brutal, real-world question, stripped of all poetry. Mingju answered first, her voice confident. I would appease the magistrate, she declared. A stable relationship with local power ensures long-term peace. I would give him a modestly increased share, while explaining the necessity of rationing to the refugees. Order must be maintained. It was a political answer. A safe answer. The answer of someone who saw people as pieces on a board. Scholar official Li's expression did not change. He turned to me. And you, Shenlian? I took a slow breath. I did not look at my father or the Grand Matriarch. I looked only at the scholar official. Honored sir, I began, my voice quiet but clear. I would not distribute the grain myself. A ripple of surprise went through the room. Even Mingju shot me a confused, triumphant look. I had failed. I continued. I would assemble a committee. I would invite the magistrate, yes, but also the respected elders from the refugee camps, the head of the local merchants' guild, and the abbess of the nearest temple like the Silent Lotus Sanctuary. They understand the needs of the people on the ground. Together, they would create a distribution list based on family size, vulnerability, and need, not on influence. The grain would be distributed publicly, from a single location, with a committee observing. The magistrate would get his share, but no more than his district's population warrants. His influence is checked by the transparency of the process and the collective will of the other members. I paused, letting the simplicity of the plan settle in the room. I would use my authority not to command, but to facilitate. To create a system that is fair by design, not by my whim. That way, when the grain is gone, the people will not blame a single person. They will have seen the justice of it with their own eyes. That is the only order that truly lasts. The silence in the hall was absolute. It was not the silence of failure, but of profound absorption. Scholar Official Lee stared at me for a long, long moment. His sharp, assessing eyes seemed to pierce through me, weighing the very substance of my soul. He saw a nobleman's daughter who did not cling to power but understood how to delegate it, who valued the wisdom of commoners and nuns, who sought systemic justice over personal praise. He did not smile, but the intensity in his gaze softened into something else, something that looked like respect. He stood, bringing the session to an end. "You have given me much to consider," was all he said, his tone giving nothing away. As we were dismissed, Mingzhu swept past me, her head held high, believing her political answer had been the superior one. But I saw the look in Scholar Official Lee's eyes as he watched her go, a flicker of dismissal. He knew. He had presented us with a test of character, and Mingzhu had given him the calculations of a courtier. I had given him the wisdom of a ruler. The crane, a symbol of wisdom and nobility in Huaxia, had tested us. And while one of us had sung a pretty song, the other had shown it the depth of the lake in which it stood. The true results were not yet announced, but in the quiet of that hall I knew. The balance had shifted, irrevocably. The days following Scholar Official Lee's assessment were draped in a tense, breathless quiet. It was the calm before the storm, and I could feel the pressure building in the air, thick and oppressive as the humidity before a summer thunderstorm. Mingzhu had retreated into a sullen silence, but it was not the silence of defeat. It was the coiled, dangerous quiet of a predator reassessing its prey. I had humiliated her publicly at the poetry contest and outmaneuvered her intellectually in front of the Crown Prince's envoy. She was wounded, and a wounded animal is, at its most, unpredictable. My sanctuary, both literal and figurative, became the Silent Lotus. I threw myself into the work there with a new fervor. The children's laughter, Jean Fei's quiet wisdom, the simple, honest labor of grinding herbs and washing linens, it was my anchor in the swirling currents of the Shun estate. It was also my strongest shield. My reputation for quiet virtue was now my most valuable asset, and I needed to tend to it as carefully as the nuns tended their lotus pond. One afternoon, as I was helping a little boy with a persistent cough, Jean Fei approached me. Her sharp, old eyes were shadowed with an unusual concern. "The air feels heavy, young Mistress Lien," she said, her voice low. "There are whispers in the market. Whispers that do not sit well with this one's spirit." I stilled, my hand pausing on the boy's forehead. "What kind of whispers, Venerable One?" "Whispers of a great act of charity," she said, her gaze piercing. "They say a certain noble young lady, known for her generous heart, plans a magnificent donation to this humble sanctuary. A very public donation." My blood ran cold. I knew instantly who this certain noble young lady was. Mingzhu. She was going to stage a grand gesture to overshadow my quiet, consistent work. She would arrive with a retinue of servants carrying sacks of rice and bolts of cloth, ensuring the whole town saw her boundless compassion. It would be a brilliant move, co-opting my territory and painting me as the one doing the paltry background work. But Jean Fei's next words sent a true jolt of dread through me. "They also whisper of misfortune. A small one. A controlled one. Something to make the rescue seem all the more heroic." The pieces snapped together with a terrifying clarity. She wasn't just planning a donation. She was planning a rescue. She would orchestrate a crisis, a fire, and then be the heroine who arrived just in time to save the day, saving the children and her own reputation in one spectacular, fiery performance. The sheer, reckless arrogance of it stole my breath. She was willing to risk the lives of these children, these nuns, this fragile haven, for her own advancement. "Thank you, Venerable One," I said, my voice tight. "Your spirit is as keen as ever. Please, say nothing to anyone. I will handle this." That evening, I summoned Yue and Xiaoyu to my chambers. The two maids stood before me, one from the heart of the household, one from its forgotten edges. They were my network. "Mingzhu plans to set a fire at the Silent Lotus," I stated bluntly, watching their faces pale. "She will then arrive to save the children and present her donations. We cannot let this happen." Xiaoyu, her thin face set with determination, was the first to speak. "I have heard things, young mistress. A man from the docks known for dirty jobs was seen speaking with one of Auntie Sue's most trusted servants." "Can you find this man?" I asked. She nodded. "I can try." "Yue," I turned to her. "I need you to watch Mingzhu's every move. Note who she speaks to, what she packs, any unusual activity. She will not risk this herself. There will be a signal." For the next 2 days, we were ghosts in the machine of the estate. Xiaoyu brought word that the dockworker had been paid half his fee up front. Yue reported that Mingzhu had ordered her palanquin to be ready at a moment's notice and had packed a chest with simple, sturdy clothing, a costume for her heroic role. The tension was a live wire. I slept in fits, my dreams filled with the scent of smoke and the sound of children crying. The attack came on the third night. It was a stiflingly hot evening, the air still and heavy. I was in my room, pretending to read, every sense stretched taut. A soft, frantic scratch came at my door.
It was Yue.
"She's ready," she whispered, her eyes wide in the dim lamplight. "She just received a message. A scrap of paper delivered by a kitchen boy. She's changing into her plain clothes now." This was it. "Go to the stable," I ordered. "Tell the groom I need my horse. Not the palanquin. The horse.
Now."
And then wake 4 of the strongest, most discreet male servants from my father's personal staff. Tell them to meet me at the rear gate with buckets and axes. Say there is a fire at the Silent Lotus, and their mistress commands their aid." I did not wait. I threw on my own undyed blue cotton robe, the one I wore to the sanctuary, and ran. I did not take the main roads. I took the back alleys, the narrow paths I had come to know so well, my horse's hooves a frantic drumbeat on the packed earth. The night air whipped past my face, but I felt no coolness, only a burning urgency. I saw the glow first, an ominous, flickering orange against the dark sky. Then, the smell of smoke, acrid and terrifying. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was too late. I had gambled and I had lost. I urged my horse faster, bursting into the clearing around the sanctuary. Flames licked at the roof of the storage shed at the back of the compound, dangerously close to the main building where the children slept. The nuns were forming a frantic bucket brigade, their faces etched with panic. The children's terrified wails cut through the crackle of the fire. And then I saw her. Mingzhu's palanquin was just arriving at the front gate. She stepped out, a vision of calm preparedness in her simple gown, ready to play her part. But I had already stolen the stage. I didn't hesitate. I slid from my horse and ran straight into the chaos. "The children!" I shouted to Jinfei, my voice cutting through the din. "Get the children out. Form a line to the pond." I didn't wait for her to respond. I dashed into the main building, the smoke stinging my eyes. I grabbed 2 of the smallest, most terrified children, scooping them into my arms. "Follow me," I yelled to the others. I led them out, coughing, their small hands clinging to my robe. Outside, my father's servants had arrived, adding their strength to the bucket brigade. I didn't stop. I went back in, guiding more children out, my face smudged with soot, my robe torn. I worked alongside the nuns and the servants, not as a director, but as a laborer. The heat was intense, the fear a tangible force, but my movements were sure, driven by a cold, clear fury. When the last child was safe and the fire was finally subdued, leaving the storage shed a charred, smoking ruin, I stood in the center of the courtyard, chest heaving, my body trembling with adrenaline and rage. The children huddled around me, clutching my legs, their sobs slowly subsiding. It was then that the prefect's wife's palanquin arrived. She stepped out, her face grave. She took in the scene, the smoldering shed, the terrified children, the exhausted nuns, and me, standing among them, disheveled and soot-stained, a child clinging to each hand. Her gaze then shifted to Mingzhu, who stood by her own pristine palanquin, her face a perfect mask of shock and concern that was now utterly, devastatingly redundant. She had arrived to find the crisis already over, the hero's role already taken. And she was clean. Impossibly, damningly clean. The prefect's wife's eyes narrowed. She did not need to be told the story. The scene told it for her. One woman was standing in the ashes, a part of the salvation. The other had arrived just after, a spectator to a finished performance. Mingju opened her mouth to speak, to offer some explanation, but the prefect's wife held up a hand, silencing her before a single word could be uttered. She turned her back on Mingju and walked towards me. "Shunlian," she said, her voice low and firm. "The Silent Lotus is in your debt. And so am I." She did not stay long. She did not need to. The judgment had been rendered. As her palanquin disappeared into the night, I looked at Mingju. The flawless mask had finally, completely shattered. What lay beneath was a raw, undiluted hatred that promised this was not over. But I had won this battle. I had taken her fire and used its light to reveal my own courage and her own calculated cowardice. The Viper had tried to wield a flame and had ended up burning herself. The days following the fire were a study in stark contrasts. At the Silent Lotus Sanctuary, I was hailed as a savior. The nuns' gratitude was quiet but profound, and the children now clung to me with a trust that felt more valuable than any jewel. In the town, the story had spread like wildfire itself, not of Mingju's planned heroism, but of my desperate, soot-stained courage. The prefect's wife had seen to that. My reputation was no longer just one of quiet virtue. It was now forged in flame and courage. But within the Shun estate, a different kind of storm was brewing. It was a cold, silent tempest of shame and fury. Mingju and Auntie Sue had retreated to their quarters like wounded animals licking their wounds. The Grand Matriarch's displeasure was a palpable chill that had settled over their wing of the house. They were not summoned for morning tea. Their opinions were not sought. They were ghosts in their own home. Yet, I felt no sense of victory. Only a cold, grim certainty that the Viper was most dangerous when cornered. The fire had been an act of reckless desperation. What would she try next? I could not simply wait to defend. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to make the invisible web of her deceit visible to all. "Shall you?" I said, the morning after the fire, summoning her to the seclusion of my reading chamber. "The dockworker who was paid. I need you to find him again. I need to know who paid him and how. I need something tangible." Ingyue, standing by my side, added, "And I will watch the servants in Auntie Sue's employ. The one who delivered the message. Fear can loosen tongues, especially when their masters are falling from grace." I also began my own investigation, one that required no spies. I went to the family archives, a dusty, quiet room filled with generations of ledgers and correspondence. I requested the household accounts for the past year, the very ledgers Mingju had so often pushed into my hands. The archivist, an old, wizened man who had always looked upon my petty queries with disdain, now handed them over with a new, grudging respect. I spent hours there, cross-referencing entries. I was not looking for large, obvious thefts. I was looking for the small, consistent patterns, the overpayment to a fabric merchant that coincided with Mingju's new gown, the inflated price for incense that matched the scent she favored, the lost funds from the Mooncake Festival that were never truly lost, just diverted. Meanwhile, Xiaoyu's work in the shadows bore fruit. 2 days later, she came to me, her eyes bright with triumph and fear. She held out a small, crumpled piece of paper. "I found the dockworker, young mistress. He was persuaded to talk." She didn't elaborate and I didn't ask. "He gave me this. It's the receipt for the oil he used to start the fire."
He was paid with this.
She placed a small, tarnished silver hairpin in my hand. It was cheap, the sort of thing a miner's servant might own. But my blood ran cold as I recognized it. It was the hairpin of the young maid who served Mingju most directly, a girl named Chun. The one Ingyue had seen receiving the message. The evidence was falling into place, but it was still circumstantial. A frightened dockworker and a servant's hairpin could be dismissed. I needed something that would resonate with the Grand Matriarch on a personal level, something that could not be explained away. And then I remembered the kingfisher hairpin. Summoning Ingyue, I went to the family vaults. I requested the ledger of jewelry and precious artifacts. There it was, a single-line entry. *, kingfisher feathered jade hairpin, gift from governor's wife. Damaged. Sent for repair. Cost 80 taels of silver. Asterisk 80 taels. A staggering sum. And the repair had been authorized by Auntie Sue. Ingwe, I said, my voice tight. Find out which jeweler repaired it.
Discreetly.
She returned within the hour. The Golden Phoenix Jewelry House. But, young mistress, I spoke to an apprentice there. He said they never received a broken kingfisher hairpin from our house. Only an order for a new one, paid for from the household funds. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Mingju hadn't just broken the hairpin, she had destroyed it in a fit of pique and then, with her mother's collusion, used the family's money to have a new one made, covering the entire scheme under the guise of a repair. They had stolen from the family coffers to hide her destructive tantrum. I had them. I had the financial deceit, the attempted arson, and the callous destruction of a priceless heirloom. I did not go to my father. I did not go to the steward. I went directly to the heart of the family's power, the Grand Matriarch. I requested a private audience, and she granted it, her expression unreadable as she sat in her private garden. I did not come with accusations or hysterics. I came with a small, lacquered box. I knelt before her and placed the box on the stone table between us. I opened it. Inside lay the tarnished hairpin, the dockworker's receipt, the ledger open to the Kingfisher hairpin entry, and a signed testimony from the jeweler's apprentice, which Xiaoyu had miraculously secured. Grandmother, I said, my voice calm and clear, I bring you evidence of a sickness within our house. A sickness of deceit, of greed, and of a recklessness that endangers not just our honor, but innocent lives. I walked her through it, piece by damning piece. The consistent, small-scale theft from the ledgers. The destruction of the Kingfisher hairpin and the fraudulent repair. The paid dockworker and the servant's hairpin used as payment, linking the fire directly to Mingju's inner circle. I presented it not as an attack, but as a dutiful granddaughter protecting the family. I bring this to you, I concluded, because the strength of our family is its integrity. I fear these actions, if left unchecked, will poison our roots. The Grand Matriarch was silent for a long time. She picked up the jeweler's testimony, her aged, veined hand trembling slightly. The Kingfisher hairpin had been a gift from a dear friend. Its wanton destruction was a personal insult. She then looked at the dockworker's receipt, her face hardening into a mask of icy rage. The fire had not just been about reputation, it had been about lives. The lives of children and holy women. She closed the box with a definitive snap. The sound echoed in the quiet garden. You have done well, Lien, she said, her voice like grinding stones. You have shown a loyalty to this family that goes beyond personal sentiment. You have shown the mind of a strategist and the heart of a true daughter of the Shen. She stood, her small frame suddenly radiating immense, terrifying authority. Leave this with me. The confrontation did not happen in public. It happened behind the closed doors of the Grand Matriarch's receiving room. I was not present, but the entire estate heard the echoes of it. The Grand Matriarch's voice, usually so measured, was a whipcrack of fury that carried through the paper walls. We heard Auntie Sue's weeping, Mingju's desperate, shrill denials, and then, the sound that sealed their fate, the heavy thud of the lacquered box being slammed onto a table. The verdict was swift and merciless. Auntie Sue was stripped of her authority to manage any household finances, forever. Mingju was placed under strict house confinement, forbidden from seeing anyone outside the family, her lessons suspended, her freedom revoked. The servant girl, Chun, and the dockworker were handed over to the prefect's magistrates for justice. Their social standing within the family was annihilated. They were now pariahs, living on suffocated by the weight of their exposed sins. That evening, as I stood on the veranda, the scent of night-blooming jasmine filling the air, I felt no joy. I had won a great victory. I had dismantled Mingju's power and exposed her for what she was. But I had seen the look in her eyes as she was led away, a look of pure, undiluted venom. I had torn apart her web of lies. But the spider was still alive, trapped and furious in its ruined nest. And I knew, with a chill that had nothing to do with the night air, that her next move would not be one of subtle deceit. It would be a final, desperate strike. The house confinement was a sentence, but for Mingju, it became a crucible. The silence that enveloped her wing was not one of penitence, but of a pressure cooker building towards an explosion. The estate learned to navigate around that part of the compound, as if it were haunted. Servants delivered meals without making eye contact, and even the birds seemed to sing more softly near her windows. The weight of her disgrace was a stone dragging her down, and I knew, with a cold certainty in my gut, that she would not simply sink. She would try to take someone down with her. A week after their confinement began, the first sign of the coming storm appeared. Ingwe came to me, her face pale. "Young mistress," she whispered, "the maid assigned to clean their rooms says Mingzhu is not eating. She sits by the window for hours, staring out, her hands clenched. She has broken all her mirrors." A shiver traced its way down my spine. This was not the calculated fury I was used to. This was something wilder, more unhinged. "The Grand Matriarch has doubled the guards at their gate," Ingwe added, "but Mingzhu is cunning. Guards watch for people trying to get in, or for a formal exit," I murmured. "They do not watch every shadow within the walls. She knows this estate's secrets as well as I do." We had, after all, grown up here together, chasing each other through its countless corridors and hidden gardens. The following evening, the air was peculiarly still. The scent of the night-blooming jasmine was overpowering, almost cloying. I felt restless, a primal unease that had me dismissing Ingwe early and pacing the length of my chamber. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though I knew it was impossible. It was the instinct of a rabbit that senses the hawk circling high above. Driven by this disquiet, I decided to take a walk in the smaller, more secluded peony garden, a place I had avoided since my rebirth. It was too close to the scene of my first death. But tonight, it felt like a challenge I needed to face. I needed to prove to myself that its shadows no longer held power over me. The garden was a tapestry of moonlight and deep indigo shadows. The peonies, heavy-headed and full, seemed to watch my passage with silent, knowing eyes. I walked to the center, to the very spot where I had fallen, and stood there, my heart a steady, defiant drum in my chest. I was alive. I had won. You. The voice was a raw, ragged scrape of sound from the darkness behind me. I turned slowly. Mingzhu emerged from behind the twisted trunk of an ancient wisteria, her movements unnervingly fluid, like a snake uncoiling. Her hair was loose and disheveled, her fine silk robes replaced by a simple, dark servant's tunic and trousers, allowing for ease of movement. But it was her eyes that froze the blood in my veins. They were twin pools of absolute blackness, shining with a feverish, unhinged light. All pretense, all artifice, was gone. This was the naked core of her, stripped bare by humiliation and hate. "You think you've won," she hissed, taking a step closer. The moonlight glinted off the small, sharp object she held in her hand, a hairpin, not of jade or gold, but of cheap, hardened steel, its tip filed to a vicious point. A weapon, easily concealed and utterly deadly. "I have only exposed the truth, cousin," I said, keeping my voice low and even, though every muscle in my body was tense to flee or fight. "You did this to yourself." "Myself?" She let out a short, barking laugh that held no humor. "I was nothing because of you. The brilliant Xinlian, the favored daughter. I had to scratch and claw for every scrap of attention, for every trinket you were simply given." She took another step, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I knew you would come here. You were always so sentimental, so obsessed with facing your ghosts. I knew you couldn't resist." So, she had been watching. She had learned my patterns, just as I had learned hers. "You were always the better player, Mingzhu," I said, subtly shifting my weight, readying myself. "I merely stopped being your game piece." "Stopped?" she snarled, her composure shattering completely. "You didn't stop. You became a monster. A calculating, cold-eyed monster. What happened to the stupid, gullible girl who would do anything I asked? The one who was so easy to manipulate. The confession, so blunt and ugly, hung in the air between us. I died," I said, my voice flat and cold. "She died on the marble floor of the prefect's hall, pushed by the cousin she trusted." Something flickered in her deranged eyes, not guilt, but a flicker of shocking recognition. "The dream," she whispered, her gaze turning distant for a terrifying second. "I have the dreams, too, of you falling of the blood, and of me, standing over you, and it feeling right." My breath caught in my throat. She remembered. Fragments, echoes, but she remembered our past life. The confirmation seemed to snap the last thread of her sanity. "It was right," she screamed, the sound tearing through the silent garden. "You were in my way. You always have been. You are going to marry the crown prince. You are going to have everything. I had to take it. I had to. With a guttural cry, she lunged. The world narrowed to the glint of the steel pin aimed at my throat. I threw myself sideways, the pin ripping through the sleeve of my robe and scoring a line of fire across my upper arm. I cried out, more in shock than pain. She was on me in an instant, a whirlwind of fury and strength born of madness. We fell to the damp grass, a tangle of limbs. Her weight was surprisingly heavy, her fingers clawing at my face, trying to find my eyes. The stink of her unwashed hair and desperate sweat filled my nostrils. You ruined everything, she shrieked, spittle flying into my face. She raised the hairpin high, two-handed, aiming for my heart. In that frozen, eternal second, I saw not the manic girl above me, but the smug, pitying face of the woman who had watched me die in another life. A cold, clear fury, purer than any I had ever felt, flooded my veins. As the pin descended, I brought my knee up hard, catching her in the stomach. She grunted, her lunge faltering for a split second. It was all I needed. I bucked, using all my strength to roll, reversing our positions. I pinned her wrist to the ground above her head, my body weight holding her down. She writhed beneath me, a trapped serpent, her eyes burning with incandescent hate. I should have killed you slower the first time, she spat. The first time? A new, horrified voice cut through the night. We both froze. Standing at the entrance to the garden were the Grand Matriarch, Scholar Official Lee, and my father, their faces a mosaic of shock and dawning horror. They had heard everything. They had seen the attack. They had heard her confession to a murder that had not yet happened, but whose truth was undeniable in her venom. The guards, who had been stationed at the main gate, came running at the sound of the commotion. They surged forward and pulled a shrieking, spitting Mingzhu off of me. She didn't try to explain. She just stared at me, even as they dragged her away, her voice rising in a final, desperate wail that echoed through the estate. How could you abandon me? It was not a question for the guards, or for the Grand Matriarch. It was a question for me, the echo of a betrayed, twisted bond that had spanned 2 lifetimes. It was the cry of a soul that could not comprehend why its favorite pawn had finally refused to be sacrificed. I stood there, trembling, my torn sleeve stained with blood, the ghost of her hatred clinging to me. The viper had struck her final, desperate blow. And in doing so, she had exposed her venom for all to see, ensuring her own destruction. The game was over, but the memory of her eyes, in that final moment, would haunt me forever. The aftermath of the Peony Garden was a quiet, surgical affair. There were no more screaming confrontations, no public trials. The truth, once laid bare, was too ugly, too damaging to the family's honor to be paraded before the world. The Shun family, like a great tree, pruned its diseased limb in private. Su Mingzhu and Auntie Su were gone before the next sunrise. They were not sent to a distant estate. That would have been too kind, too connected. They were escorted under heavy guard to a remote, secular nunnery in the barren northern mountains, a place known for its harsh discipline and its utter isolation from the world. It was a living tomb. There would be no letters, no visitors, no return. The Grand Matriarch had ensured it. The name, Su Mingzhu, was never to be spoken within the walls of the Shun estate again. It was as if she had never existed. The silence she left behind was profound. It was not the tense, waiting silence of before, but a deep, clean quiet, like the hush after a storm has washed the air clean. The estate itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. My arm healed, the shallow scratch from her hairpin fading to a thin, silver line, a permanent, physical reminder of the war I had fought and won. The servants now looked at me with a new kind of respect, one tinged with a touch of awe. I was no longer just the kind young mistress or the clever daughter. I was the one who had faced the viper in the dark and emerged victorious. A week after Mingzhu's removal, a formal missive arrived from the prefect's office, sealed with the personal chop of Scholar Official Lee. My father received it in his study, his hands trembling slightly as he broke the seal. He read it, his eyes scanning the elegant characters once, then again. When he looked up at me, his expression was one of such profound, weary pride that my own eyes stung. "It is done," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Scholar Official Lee has completed his report to the Ministry of Rights. He has recommended you, Xin Lian, as the prime candidate for the Crown Prince's consort, citing your unwavering integrity, practical wisdom, compassionate heart, and formidable strength of character. The words should have sent me into a fit of joy. This was the destiny that had been stolen from me, now restored. But a strange calm settled over me. The title, the position, they were not the prize. The prize was my life, reclaimed. The prize was the respect I had earned, not through birthright, but through my own actions. The official decree from the capital, Jinling, arrived a month later. The imperial edict was read aloud in the main hall, the vermilion ink and dragon emblazoned parchment a declaration of a new future. I knelt and received it, the heavy scroll feeling not like a burden, but like a key. There were no more battles to fight within the Shin family. My father looked at me as his heir in spirit, if not in name. The Grand Matriarch consulted me on household matters, her trust absolute. I was no longer a piece on the board. I was a player. The day of my departure for the capital dawned clear and bright. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of chrysanthemums and the distant, hopeful smell of wood smoke. The Shin estate was a flurry of controlled activity, my belongings carefully packed into lacquered chests. The farewells were tender, filled with a love that was no longer complicated by jealousy or manipulation. As my palanquin was carried through the grand gates, I did not look back. I had said my goodbyes to the ghosts of that place. The journey to Jinling was a passage through a changing world. We moved from the familiar, lush landscapes of Lingzhou to the grander, more austere beauty of the heartland, the roads growing wider, the traffic more dense with officials and merchants. With every mile, I felt the layers of my old life falling away, not with regret, but with a sense of necessary shedding. We arrived at the capital as the first winter snow began to fall, dusting the majestic, swooping roofs of the palace complex in powdered sugar. My new quarters were in an elegant residence within the imperial compound, reserved for the crown prince's intended. It was spacious, serene, and overlooked a frozen lake dotted with hardy, late-blooming plum trees.
There was no grand ceremony that day.
No immediate audience with the crown prince. There was only a quiet settling in, a deliberate space for me to breathe the air of my new life. That evening, I stood on the veranda of my new home, wrapped in a cloak of deep blue velvet. The snow fell in soft, silent flakes, muffling the sounds of the vast palace. The air was cold and clean, scented of pine and frozen water. I looked out past the lake, toward the silhouetted peaks of the palace roofs, their lines sharp and confident against the twilight sky. I was Shun Lian, but I was no longer the girl who had died in a pool of her own blood, betrayed. I was no longer the pawn used and discarded. I was the woman who had fought her way back from the grave with wisdom as her sword and patience as her shield. I was the Jade Phoenix, risen from the ashes of a life stolen. The future was a blank scroll, stretching out before me, unwritten. It was filled with the unknown complexities of the court, the challenges of a royal marriage, the weight of a destiny I had seized for myself. But I felt no fear, only a steady, thrilling certainty. I had broken free from the chains of my past. I had looked into the eyes of my murderer and had not flinched. I had carved my own name into the stone of my family's history. The sun had set on the girl I used to be. But here, in the quiet hush of the falling snow, in the heart of the empire, a new dawn was breaking. And I, Shun Lian, was ready to meet it. I took a deep breath of the cold, imperial air, and I stepped forward.